This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.
Support for this program comes from the Gail and Tom Benson Charitable Foundation, committed to funding educational causes.
Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villery.
We count on Informed Sources to continue the discussion on important local issues.
It's where our top journalists discuss stories they've covered. Stay informed with Informed Sources.
Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, usually in November, when LSU is in the news, the emphasis is on playing for championships. Instead, there has been a bowl full of drama as a coach was fired, an athletic director resigned, and a replacement was named. Plus, a new president was appointed as well as a chancellor. And that's just in Baton Rouge. In New Orleans, there was movement toward the university's takeover of UNO. We'll discuss these stories as well as the debt relief efforts for the Archdiocese and the city government. We'll also take a special look at some of the important crime-related stories during the career of reporter Mike Perlstein. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Stephanie Riegel, staff writer, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate, Mike Perlstein, freelance investigative reporter, and Marie Fazio, staff writer, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. We go over to Stephanie first because there has been agreement to the settlement proposal regarding the Archdiocese and clergy's abuse survivors.
Right, and as I think we discussed last time, it was a really key development a few weeks back in September when the largest group of survivors and their lawyers got behind the joint settlement plan. More recently, this week, in fact, in court filings, we learned the name of the buyer of Christopher Homes, which is one of the largest church assets, that portfolio of 15 low-income apartment complexes for senior citizens. And there was a lot of concern that the sale of the Christopher Homes properties, which are going to generate a lot of money for the settlement in the bankruptcy case, would displace their elderly residents, of which there are something like 1,700. But the good news this week we learned was the identity of the buyer, a company named Treadway, which is based in New York. They own affordable housing complexes all over the country. They're backed in part by the wife of the owner has some ties to the New York Giants, but they have a really proven track record of success and of investments in affordable housing properties. And so that should put to rest, I think, some of the fear of the people who lived there. What it will mean for the settlement is a $152 million sale. Now, off the top, 70 or so million of that goes to pay off HUD debt. Another 70 million goes directly into the trust for survivors. And what it's going to ultimately do is boost the total settlement to $230 million guaranteed, not including additional settlement monies that survivors may be entitled to if they sue the non-settling insurance company, which is Travelers. And Travelers may still come to the table before this is all said and done and throw more money into the settlement. But as of now, the plan calls for assigning the rights to sue Travelers over to the trustee that represents the survivors and letting them go for it. So they could see upwards of, I don't know, $250 million by the time it's all said and done. There are almost 700 of them, we understand, who have filed claims in this case. That money's not going to be divided evenly. If it were, you know, you can do the math at home, whatever that comes out to. But that's what you're looking at. So the settlement was sent out to everyone involved in the case, and they had to vote on it. They had to vote on it. It was overwhelmingly approved by like 96% of the survivors who voted, and the commercial creditors have also approved it. Those would be like the vendors and the small businesses that do stuff for the Archdiocese. A group of bondholders still owed like $29 million on a 2017 loan that they made to the Archdiocese to refinance debt. They are not on board with it. They say the plan does not fairly compensate them. They are pushing back hard against the plan, and it's going to make the confirmation hearing, which begins a week from Monday, a little bit longer and more complicated than it would otherwise need to be. But the judge has already indicated this will be what they call a cram down scenario, where because the survivors, who are really the claimants that count in this case, have so overwhelmingly voted for it, along with other commercial creditors, they're basically trying to cram down or force this plan and force the bondholders to accept it.
So they're not accepting it doesn't mean that this throws the settlement out of whack.
No, they were unsecured debt to begin with, and they do get some money out of it, but they say that it's not fair. They say that the plan has not been negotiated in good faith, and in fact, they filed their objections today. And so they're going to lay all that out at a trial that's going to take 10 days, starting before Thanksgiving. It's going to carry through after Thanksgiving, go over into January. We'll hear from Archbishop Amen. We're going to hear from the new incoming Archbishop Cecchio. We're going to hear from survivors who will have an opportunity to take the stand and tell their side of the story. And then towards the end, we'll hear from bondholders who will argue why this plan shouldn't be confirmed.
And Stephanie, how does this compare to maybe previous settlements by other archdioceses?
Well, in terms of the total amount, I mean, it's sort of in the middle of the road. There have been settlements that are much more. There have been some that are way less. And there is a lady who is a fabulous law professor at Penn State. She tracks the whole thing. She knows more about this than anybody. And I've looked at the spreadsheet many, many times over the past few years. And we were trending sort of about median. I don't remember the highest and the lowest offhand because I haven't looked at it in a while. But, I mean, I would say it is a fair amount as far as the survivors. And again, like, don't ask me. Their lawyers, who, as we know, pushed back hard against this for a long time, for 5 years, have now decided this is fair. And so they're the ones who say it's, it's a decent amount.
And parish's contribution, what will that be?
So a really interesting thing about this that we're going to see unfold next week is that the parishes, which have been considered non-debtor affiliates of the mothership archdiocese, which is the debtor in this case, are going to become debtors. They're going to become additional debtors now. They're going to file what's known as like a mini pre-pack bankruptcy. It's going to basically push them through the bankruptcy court process within a matter of days, and their bankruptcy case will be, resolved on the same day that the plan is confirmed and resolved. The whole idea is that this will shield them from any future exposure for claims that may be hanging out there against them that haven't been filed yet. So, like, in recent days, the Archdiocese has been advertising on TV and in legal journals saying, if you have a claim against Saint blah, 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 or against a priest who was at St. blah, 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 you have until December 2nd to get that claim in. And then, ultimately these parishes will be, but they're going to have to put up money. And so we'll be finding out in the days and weeks to come how much that will be. The total bill for the parishes and the affiliated charities is $60 million.
Okay, but we don't know how much each parish will be coughing out.
No,
It's
and they're not
gonna be-
going to tell us publicly, so we're going to have to just rely on gossip and on priests who might make a plea from the pulpit.
Well, it's moving along then. All right, Stephanie, thanks a lot. Let's go on over to you because some movement over there in the world of LSU.
A couple of weeks ago when LSU played Texas A&M, life would have been a lot simpler had LSU won. Instead, Texas A&M won they really manhandled LSU, 47-25. And then that just touched off a whole chain of events. Also, it happened in Tiger Stadium, too, which made it even worse, where the students are chanting, "Fire Kelly, fire Kelly." So it couldn't get worse as with the night.
Well, the fans got their wish. That happened.
That they did. They got it the next day when the athletic director, Scott Woodward, said that Kelly was going to be fired. And then anytime you fire a coach, there's a lot of conversation. Adding to the conversation was the reminder that in his contract, that Kelly had the $53 million buyout, which is done in some colleges, but it's not something that governors like to hear. And so this got Governor Landry involved, so that by Monday, Governor Landry was saying, well, we're going to have to hire a new coach, but Scott Wood was not going to have anything to do with it. We're going to take care of it. Now, in any job, of any place in the world, if there's one thing an employee doesn't like is somebody stepping on their job, especially if it's somebody, if the governor, right? And so for the governor to say to Woodward, you're not going to hire the coach, we or some commission are going to do it. So by the next day, Woodward resigned. So you had a fired football coach and a resigned athletic director. So this added to the confusion. And of course, there are a lot of people saying, is this a proper role for a governor? Well, in Governor Landry's case, everything's a proper role. I mean, he's going to be there. And
in his mind.
So they appointed one of the high-ranking people of the athletic department, a guy named Verge Osbury, who I don't know much about, but everything I've heard, people who know him really like him. I mean, they speak highly of him. They appointed him first interim director, and then by Tuesday, when you had a new president, the president first said, yeah, he's interim director. Then the media guidelines said that the interim or the athletic director, and so Rouse, the new president, said he's the athletic director. So at least that's been resolved. And so he'll be heading up, working with a committee on getting a new football coach. So anyway, so what's happening, I guess, in the days that have followed, that a lot of the confusion is just starting to be resolved a little bit. Hiring a new president was a good first step, and for the new president to say, this is the athletic director, I think it's a good step too. All this happens, if it's got to happen, it couldn't be a better time in the schedule, because by tradition, the week before LSU plays Alabama, LSU doesn't have a game. They use this to kind of heal all their injuries. So this was the bye week last week. It was a great time for a bye week. Now the bye week's over, and this week LSU plays Alabama. And so by this weekend, maybe people can start thinking about football again.
Okay, so LSU now, real important, has a new president. President Roos now, right, who came from McNeese? And then also a new chancellor.
Right, yeah. They kind of like recreated the position of chancellor. Chancellor, the difference between a president and a chancellor is that the president oversees the entire system, and the chancellor in this case will be overseeing the Baton Rouge University, those day-to-day details.
All right, and other things that he's going to have to oversee too is the University of New Orleans, because UNO is now moving back into the LSU system, and so there was some movement about that, a certain committee that met this week, and you reported on that.
Right, yes, so the transition team leading this shift, UNO is moving back to the LSU system, met for the first time on Wednesday at UNO's campus. Actually, the new LSU system president and chancellor were both there in attendance. So a lot was said about branding. I don't know if you guys saw, they presented the new LSU New Orleans purple and gold logo and the purple and gold privateer, which was met with, some thoughts from students that I spoke with after the meeting. And a lot still has to be hashed out. So the executive team is made up of 19 movers and shakers, I would say, from Boise Bollinger, a couple LSU Board of Supervisors members, and Master P, of course, it's UNO. And then they're being advised by working groups. So it's dozens of other people who are in attendance at this meeting. So there are teams working on real estate, governance, academics. So they were all tasked with marching orders to come back in a month with your best ideas, and then this executive team will kind of tell us what they want to do moving forward. And the shift doesn't happen until next July, so we have months before anything changes.
Because they're looking at everything there. I mean, the university really has been struggling with, decreased enrollment, trying to get, more students over there, and even down to the real estate. Will all those business buildings be used? Some have already been closed down, right? Yeah,
there was a lot of talk about partnering with developers to use some of that underused space on campus. They have that arena that I think has been utilized to its fullest potential. So more to come for sure.
Wade Rouse, the new president, has been president of McNeese University in Lake Charles, which is part of the University of Louisiana system, to which UNO transferred a few years ago. That has ULL and Southeastern Nichols. But here's the guy that's coming in who's seen the University of Louisiana system, and he understands the LSU system. So I think he's going to be someone that's going to be very supportive of it, and he's seen both sides of it.
I think so too, and he mentioned at the meeting that he attended UNO for his MBA, so he's familiar with the campus. He said it was quite different back when he went, so he's trying to kind of bring back that life.
You know, I'm sorry, I was going to say it's just interesting how, you know, these tides sort of changed so much. A few years ago, and I was in Baton Rouge then, you know, the impetus for the president of LSU was to go big, to go national, and so to hire somebody who comes from a much smaller university who really didn't have the kind of experience from the UL system is really, you know, it just shows the different political direction. It shows the changing times. And then, you know, at the same time, back when they hired King Alexander in 2013, that was when the Board of Supervisors merged that chancellor and president position. And I think there was some debate at the time, but they thought it would really create a better, more effective leader and close some problems that you had with the sort of bifurcated system. And now we're going back to the bifurcated system, which I think kind of makes sense, actually, to have like an academic person versus a business system-wide leader. But, you know, it back to the whole Jeff Landry and political involvement and who really decides what's best for LSU.
And it does look like, you know, going in-state maybe expedited these selections instead of long searches of out-of-state candidates who you would have to get to know.
Right.
In this case, there were some known quantities.
I think something significant is the name. If they could call it what, LSU in New Orleans, okay? And so they're emphasizing the words New Orleans, which is a selling point as opposed to UNO or LSU. And I don't think it's good to have a university, the last few words of the word no. Okay? And so it's just like Memphis State University. Tulane played this week. For many years, they were Memphis State. They dropped the state, and we're Memphis University. We're the University of Memphis now.
Well, we certainly hope that this move will strengthen the university, LSU New Orleans. I mean, LSU Alexandria is called just that, LSU Alex. So we just want the best for what is right now UNO, because it's been so important to this community and to so many people. And I guess we'll have to live with the purple and gold, those of us who like the silver and blue. Okay, we got to move over to Mike now, because you have a lot to talk about. Mike is retired. Everybody, he is retired, but he's going to still keep working. We need him to keep working. He's a good reporter. But he's going to tell us about some of the big stories he's covered in his career.
Right, and I'm retired from the newsroom at Channel 4, WWL Louisiana. But when Errol approached me about, think of, say, a top 10. Well, number one, it's like ranking your children. There's no top, so these are in no particular order. And I had to narrow it down from the dozens and dozens of, you know, stories that stick out in my mind. But I can just tell you that when I first arrived as a cub reporter in 1986 with the Times-Picayune, I parachuted directly into a malfeasance trial of Leander Perez Jr. Wow. And little did I know the history lesson I'd be getting on the whole Perez regime, not just the art segregationist racist part, and then the two sons, the Shakespearean battle between the two that blew the whole thing up, but the corruption and the fraud, more than $100 million. So I presided over the not guilty verdict of Leander Jr., and then later the settlement, $80 million settlement, in which the Perezes had to, I guess, own up to stealing from the parish for decades to the tune of more than $100 million. They paid $80 million back. And that was my introduction
to quite an introduction,
welcome
really.
to Louisiana.
Southeast Louisiana. And, you know, it wasn't long before I ended up in the, you know, downtown at the city desk of the Times-Picayune, the hot topic, and it led into investigations, and I guess my desire to be an investigative reporter was the New Orleans Police Department. A lot of, at the time, lower to mid-level corruption, and I'm exposing the Vice Squad riddled with vice, and, you know, the pedophile who was leading up the juvenile sex crimes, you know, bureau, and it was mind-blowing to me, even before Len Davis, still on federal death row for ordering the execution of a woman, Antoinette Frank in a triple murder at the Kim On restaurant, and interestingly, I can say that that arc that I started with the low-level and medium-level corruption into the big cases, and then really exploded during Katrina with the Danziger Bridge, the Glover case, major trials for officers. It expanded all the way to when I left the TV newsroom with the consent decree just winding down. that tied all of that over the arc of my career. So NOPD corruption, it's a broad topic that lasted for decades.
Your entire career here.
That's right.
Yeah,
And that's 20 years at the newspaper, 16 years on TV. We all know that for many, many years, New Orleans had the highest per capita murder rate in the country. And I've got to be honest, at a certain point after doing that story for many years, I said, I'm not doing that anymore. I put them on a map. I've done individual stories. I'm moving on, give that to somebody else. I was thinking of a fresh angle, and I came up with a series called Bullets That Don't Kill. 4 to 5 times as many people are shot, wounded, and don't die as there are murder victims, at a much larger toll on society or city, financially and otherwise. The cost of somebody ending up in a wheelchair the rest of their lives, both the medical expenses, personal expenses. And I do think that we, ever since, kind of expanded how we look at shootings as fatal and non-fatal. The toll of non-fatal is astronomical and actually greater than, tragically, the murder rate, which is still high. I can't ignore some of the biggest stories. This one was national and international, and we just had the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. I was part of that band of reporters at the Times-Picayune who refused to evacuate. The floodwaters were rising, and we were left to kind of figure it out. We took a delivery truck right back into the floodwaters, and it ended up spinning off hundreds of stories everywhere we turned, everywhere we looked, enough that 20 years later, it was obviously a pretty major event, just recollecting everything this city went through.
Changed the city and changed a lot of people, too.
And then here's another topic that really spanned the course of my career, and I call it, bail to bracelet. And it was a little cheat code I had when I was a young investigative reporter, in which make friends with your bail bondsman. They know the street, they know the criminals, they know the judges, they know the cops. And so I always befriended the bail bondsman, and I did major series, and it changed laws. There was bail shopping once upon a time. You wanted a low bail, go to your favorite, lenient judge. And then all the way to now, ankle bracelets to this day are the things that are in the news. And I covered that extensively as a major law enforcement tool.
To rush
down the drain. My news director at Channel 4 said, why does New Orleans keep flooding? And next thing you know, a team of many reporters, investigators, came up with an hour-long documentary. And the questions that were answered and raised still applicable today on the Sewage and Water Board.
Yeah, that's certainly
all the things that went wrong, exposed by Channel 4 under the Down the Drain series.
And you all have won a lot of awards for that.
That's
too.
right.
Really great.
Now, here's
report.
a dull but important, I call it dull but important, DBI, which was I uncovered through a source that the judges at criminal court, civil court, Fourth Circuit Court of Appeal were collecting supplemental insurance strictly illegal. And the aftermath of that, it wasn't sexy, but all these judges got hauled before the Judiciary Commission, had to pay back a lot of money. All of that extra insurance got halted. So it ended up being a pretty important story and put me on the wrong side of some judges, but they're judges. They should know they were wrong. Another story that it's still going on is highway robbery, which is the staged accident fraud. I've been on this show talking about it for more than 5 years.
Wow.
People intentionally ramming into 18-wheelers to file fraudulent lawsuits for big paydays. 55 people indicted, 50 have pleaded guilty, and now there's the murder of a federal witness scheduled for trial with 2 defendants allegedly behind that. And then a couple to wrap up, were just near and dear to my heart. One is Jose Silva. This story probably nobody remembers except the people who are close to that story. But this was a man named Jose Silva who was Cuban. He was a sailor, a merchant marine. He got busted in New Orleans when his partner that he was with had a marijuana cigarette. And he ended up in jail. And while in jail, there was the Cuban Missile Crisis, and he ended up being a man without a country for 50 years. Couldn't go back to Cuba and be deported. Couldn't get a U.S. passport. He could never leave the state. He lived this shadow life. And through the Freedom of Information Act, which is hard to use, but I got the federal documents that kind of exposed the whole thing. And after 50 years, we got Jose Silva citizenship. Voted for the first time.
As
he
an
was
American
the most proud
citizen.
American. And then that leads to the stories that are nearest and dearest to me personally, and I'll just list the names, Wanda West, Troy Ellis, and Jamal Cox, all were serving lengthy sentences, and the stories that we did didn't show their innocence, but it showed injustice, disproportionate sentences, and we were able to, in each of these stories, years of reporting and getting attorneys involved, pleading to district attorneys to have proportionate justice. All three of those individuals are now free from lengthy prison sentences, and it just echoes what I always say. I said it to students over the years and for myself and any other colleague, is journalism matters. It can affect the lives of individuals profoundly, and I'm pleased to say all three of those individuals are doing great. I'm still in touch. It's almost like they're like an extended part of my family, and nothing hits home more than having that kind of impact on an individual with a news story.
And journalism is absolutely important, and you've had a wonderful career. We thank you for all the great reporting. We want to keep hearing from you, too.
Well, hopefully that'll be the case, and thank you for saying that. I really do appreciate it.
And you know what, E, we can't go to this next story because we are out of time. We got to do roundtable, and that was about the city and its finances, but we will certainly be talking about that more in the future.
Yeah, the story is about the city trying to get more money. I think that there's a resolution. We'll hear more about it next week.
Okay, so other stories.
But in November 15th, there's going to be city elections, and one of the bond proposals will be $450 million for infrastructure improvement. This kind of reminds me of the local Cleveland, the big, beautiful bill. It's going to be on there, and there's other attached bills. But it's an important proposal. November 15th ballot in New
And for more
Orleans.
information, you can go to Bureau of Governmental Research site, bgr.org, and learn more about that. Real quick, guys. Stephanie?
Yeah, more than 2 years ago, the City Council asked for a study on commercial short-term rentals to help guide their efforts to revise this law that keeps getting thrown out and changed and is so complex. And that study is finally out in draft form. So we take a look at it this weekend.
Okay, great. We'll be looking for that. Mike, real quick.
Yeah, of course, remember the mass jail escape? 10 inmates, leaving the Orleans Justice Center. They've now all been rounded up, with the last Derrick Rose arrested in Atlanta. But the investigation that looked into how it happened, who might have been involved on the inside and on the outside, is still sitting there with the state police, Attorney General's office. Now there's going to be a change in the sheriff. We now know, and the big question is, does that come out before the change with the sheriff or after? And it sounds like it's likely to be unveiled before.
Okay, Marie, quick.
Next week, a federal judge will hear from families of children with special needs in the New Orleans school system and may soon decide whether to lift the consent judgment that's been in place for about a decade at this point.
Okay. All right, guys. Thanks so much for being here. Thank you all for joining. We'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villery.
We count on Informed Sources to continue the discussion on important local issues.
It's where our top journalists discuss stories they've covered. Stay informed with Informed Sources.
Support for this program comes from the Gail and Tom Benson Charitable Foundation, committed to funding educational causes.
This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.